well, as we now know, that AI, what's real and what's pretend, what's fabricated and what's real is very difficult to know and very difficult to defend yourself against, very difficult to be authentic about. So we are in a new area here, the sorts of things, but taking people, young people, these platforms is just going to delay things and possibly make things worse, because then they don't have channels of safety to talk to adults and trusted others about things that are going wrong. And that is still a child's best response, is to get support from people and be able to talk through the options and develop their own critical reasoning and response skills.
All right. Statute before we vote on this last piece of federal funding. This isn't a big government shutdown. It is a hopefully temporary disagreement over the standards of conduct of the officers who operate under the Department of Homeland Security.
News update and headlines. Bandit shooting accused face caught for the first time. The 24 years from the man for murder. New evidence suggests. Savannah Guthrie's new post. Savannah Guthrie's new post.
And I wanted to say to whoever has her or knows where she is, that it's never too late.
Our correspondent.
News update and headlines. India beats Pakistan by 61 runs at Men's T20 Cricket World Cup. UK ex-energy Ukraine headlines. FBI analyzes proofs found near the home of Nancy Guthrie. It's never too late. Savannah Guthrie's new prayer. Starmer pledge crackdown on addictive element of social media. Ready to discuss nuclear deal compromises, minister tells. News update. News update. News update and headlines. Social media laws. Starmer promised to move at speed to close Group 4 in online safety law. Headlines. Second anniversary of death of Alexei Navalny. It's never too late. Savannah Guthrie's new prayer for mother's release. Starmer pledge crackdown on addictive element of social media. Second anniversary of the death of Alexei Navalny. India beat Pakistan 61 runs at men's T20 Cricket World Cup. Ukraine ex-energy minister detained while attempting to leave the country.
I realized that he was completely transparent, honest person whose goal was to come to power to Russia only in order to make Russia a country that does not need somebody to be a king or a tsar, as he said, but for Russia a complete democracy, and that was his only goal. That was the man who went back to Russia to try to be with the people and not talk to it from abroad when he made the, as we now see, ill-fated decision to go back in the beginning of 2021. And that was the man that I and his colleagues spent almost a year and a half trying to free in an exchange of prisoners that ultimately happened without his salary.
Christo.
The announcement does change. First of all, I cannot overstate the miracle of this discovery, because the Russian government did everything possible to not let any samples of the body, not have the relatives have access to the body taken out. And despite this, the family were able to carry out and transport tiny samples and deliver them to Western laboratories for independent testing. The miracle is further enhanced by the fact that this was a very rare poison, previously unknown to have been used as in a weaponized form against a human by another human or by government. So it was a sequence of very unlikely events that led to this announcement a couple of days ago. I don't think this was anticipated by Putin. I don't think it was. Many people say, oh, he would love to be blamed for this, and he was leading sort of a business card of a unique poison left and right, as he did with Novichok. No, from everything we've seen this time around, they made everything possible for this to be untraceable, untractable as a crime. So that's why I do think that this announcement makes huge difference. It is a slap in the face of Putin. It will be another humiliation for him, also domestically. And it was important for this statement to come out again, because alternatively, Russia would always be able to default to, well, nothing was found, and therefore he died in the court. Suffering. We even see, and your own correspondent in Moscow has recently reported a unprecedented way of critical comments in government-supported media or government-run media about the state of the economy. So any sanction at this point is actually going to have a consequence in terms of potentially putting Russia over the cliff economically and helping stop the war. Things like this that unite people. I mean, nobody can say why sanction Russia over something as egregious as it carrying a poison attack against its own prisoner. Do help, again, because it is one thing to argue for sanctions because of a war on a third country. It's another thing to argue for sanctions over Putin killing his own people. And I do think that this will help.
And the Kremlin asked.
The second anniversary of the death of Alexei Navalny. Iran ready to discuss nuclear. UK considering significant increase to defense spending. Police framed man who spent 23 years in prison for murder, new evidence suggests. News update and headlines. News update and headlines on this Monday. News update and headlines on this Monday. News update and headlines on this Monday. Savannah Guthrie posted a new video on social media saying her family still has hope for her mother's return. She said, "It is never too late to do the right things," she said. The FBI has described the suspect seen in doorbell footage from Guthrie's home as a 5'9" tall man with an average build wearing a Ozark Trail hiker backpack. Secretary of State Marco Rubio said the White House wants Europe to reduce its dependence on American power and that Washington is not asking Europe to be a vessel. Rubio was speaking in Slovakia a day after he offered some reassurance to Annie's European leader at the Munich Security Conference. A new round of Iran nuclear negotiations is scheduled for Tuesday in Geneva, Switzerland. Sources previously told that with U.S. envoy Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner expected to attend. The Department of Justice on Saturday sent Congress a list of politically exposed persons in the millions of files released related to its probes into convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein. The son of Iran's last Shah, Reza Pahlavi, is calling for humanitarian intervention by the U.S. following a brutal crackdown on protests against the regime as President Donald Trump considers military strike on the country. President Donald Trump says that his newly formed Board of Peace will unveil a multi-billion-dollar humanitarian and reconstruction package for Gaza, along with a major international security. Iran Marine finished 8th after multiple mistakes in aiming for gold.
My program, so up with everything and just go out. That happened was, I have no words, honestly.
Ilya Marinin via Instagram. Darkness, no matter how hard you try to stay sane through the endless. News updates and headlines. Nearly all DH workers will remain on the job, even if many won't get paid until the lapse end. And the public probably won't notice much of a change. Team USA is off the men's hockey quarterfinals after 5-1 drubbing of Germany, the last event in another packed day of Winter Olympics action. Mikhail Shifrin finished off the podium in the giant slalom after skiing conservatively across both lanes. Shifrin still head into the slalom event as the prohibited favorite. News update and headlines. News updates and headlines. Top news: Australia MBS backs to life with SPA. Rubio says alliance with Europe is critical. Headlines: Rubio says alliance with Europe is critical.
Anyone is winning. The Russians are losing 7,000 to 8,000 soldiers a week. Not wounded, dead. Ukraine has suffered extraordinary damage, including, overnight, and again, to its energy infrastructure, and it will take billions of dollars and years to rebuild that country. So I don't think anyone can claim to be winning it. I think that both sides are suffering tremendous damage, and we'd like to see the war come to an end. It's a senseless war. In our view, the president believes that very deeply. He believes the war would have never happened had he been president at the time. So we're doing two things. So obviously we continue. Look, we don't provide arms to Russia. We provide arms to Ukraine. We don't sanction Ukraine. We sanction Russia. But at the in a unique position of serving as probably the only nation on earth that can bring the two sides to discuss the potential for ending this war on negotiated terms. And it's an obligation we won't walk away from, because we think it's a very unique one to have. It may not come to fruition, unfortunately. I hope it does, and I think there are days when I feel more optimistic about it than others, but we're going to keep trying. That is, in the end, this war will not be solved militarily. It will be, in the end, it will come to a negotiated settlement. We'd like to see that happen as soon as possible.
I'm worried that if Ukraine loses the war, it's going to be a disaster for the transatlantic relationship, because Americans will say the Europeans didn't provide enough arms, and Europeans will look and remember the meeting in the White House and Zelensky and Trump, and they will blame
that would ignore reality. Look, Ukraine, first of all, they deserve a lot of credit. They fought very bravely. They've received extraordinary amount of support from the United States to the tune of billions of dollars that pre-exist the war. In fact, Ukraine probably wouldn't have survived the early days of the war had it not been for American aid that came to them even before the war had started. With the Javelin missiles that disabled the tank.
I wasn't saying it was fair. I was just saying there's a possibility. You have to deal with perceptions.
No, but I'm not worried about that, because I can tell you that I think history will understand it. But I don't think the war is going to end in a traditional loss in the way people think. I don't think it's possible for Russia to even achieve whatever initial objectives they had at the beginning of this war. I think now it's largely narrowed down to their desire to take 20% of Donetsk that they don't currently possess. And that's hard. It's a hard concession for Ukraine to make for obvious reasons, both from a tactical standpoint and also from a political one. And so that's kind of where this thing is narrowed. And, we'll continue to search for ways to see if there's a solution to that unique problem that's acceptable to Ukraine and that Russia will also accept.
A very common theme of your speech was the need to share the burden, the need for Europe and America to do things together, which was slightly different from the Vice President last year. Were you kind of offering a carrot where perhaps he was offering a stick?
I think it's the same message. I think what the Vice President said last year very clearly was that Europe had made a series of decisions internally that were threatening to the alliance and ultimately to themselves, not because we hate Europe or we don't like Europeans, but because what is it that we fight for? What is it that binds us together? And ultimately, it's the fact that we are both heirs to the same civilization, and it's a great civilization, and it's one we should be proud of. It's one that's contributed extraordinarily to the world, and it's one, frankly, upon which America is built. From our language to our system of government, to our laws, to the food we eat, to the name of our cities and towns, all of it deeply linked to this Western civilization and culture that be proud of, and it's worth defending. And ultimately, that's the point. The point is that people don't fight and die for abstract ideas. They're willing to fight and defend who they are and what matters and is important to them. And that was the foundation he laid last year in his speech, and we add on into this year to explain to people that when we come off as urgent or critical about decisions that Europe has failed to make or made, it is because we care. It is because we understand that ultimately our own fate will be intertwined with what happens with Europe. We want Europe to survive. We want Europe to prosper because we're interconnected in so many different ways, and because our alliance is so critical. But it has to be an alliance of allies that are capable and willing to fight for who they are and what's important.
That was U.S. Secretary Marco Rubio. U.S. Secretary Marco Rubio talking about Ukraine and Russia. News update. Key leaders spoke at Munich Security Conference.
Last year, but the criticism is still there, and it really is coming from President Trump and Trump's view of sort of maintaining the purity or strength of a nation or an alliance. And they firmly believe, as they do in the United States, that Europe has gone too far on immigration, for example, and that the values, exactly what Lugo was talking about, that the United States wants to project and protect, and Europe, they thought, also could be compromised by having such a multicultural, religious, economically, where those sort of pillars that we once shared may be weakening. That's a Trump policy, and it's a Trump policy that is consistent in the United States and in Europe. But the way that Rubio delivered the tone suggests that the Trump administration and Trump himself wants to mend some of the fracture that we've been seeing much more glaringly in the last couple of months.
With the politics of the US, we lead up to the midterms. The approach, the foreign affairs approach and stance of this administration, is it playing well domestically, Wendy?
Well, Trump has exerted individual solo power, right, in his second term. He tried in the first, but this is a much different level. He believes in a unitary executive, right? Unitary. He doesn't really care what Congress thinks, and he doesn't really care what the international community thinks. He projects power. That works so long as you're successful. So long as relationships and the voters feel that we're getting the better of these relationships. But right now, voters are worried much more about the domestic U.S. economy, but they also worry about tariffs. Those are increasingly hitting home, and they worry about security. If Trump's going to go it alone in Iraq or Venezuela or, abandon Ukraine, which I don't think that they will do, but that, to the United States, we say, wait a minute, are we alone now? And if we're alone, why are we getting involved abroad? You said, President Trump, we wouldn't.
Il a également critiqué l'initiative de Bruxelles visant à mettre fin complètement au transit de l'énergie russe en Europe en 2027, affirmant qu'elle aurait des conséquences désastreuses pour son pays et d'autres. Les deux hommes ont également discuté des relations bilatérales ainsi que d'un éventuel accord nucléaire, la Slovaquie étant intéressée par l'importation de réacteurs américains dans le cadre d'un accord d'une valeur comprise entre 13 et 15 milliards d'euros. Rubio se rendra ensuite à Budapest, selon comme un leader fort.
And all of a sudden, within a couple of weeks, okay, that's not going to happen. That is the Trump administration. There isn't a lot of certainty about what we have going forward, but you can see now the confluence for the Trump administration on voters' perception of how they're doing and what things cost, and then the effect of tariffs on businesses. Farmers, for example, we paid $12 billion in extra. Promise he'd bring back to onshoring because of tariffs in part. Make things here, you don't have to pay a tariff, it'll be better. That hasn't happened. In fact, we've got more plant closures. than we had last year. So I think the problem is the delivery. Will you deliver success and jobs and cheaper goods? And so far, that isn't happening. So I do think you'll see the president individually in different relationships rolling back tariffs where they affect constituencies, where the GOP needs political support in 2026. And that includes, by the way, several farm states that have key elections that will matter to the control of the U.S. Senate in particular.
July the 1st, this of course is the trade agreement between Mexico, the US and Canada. Where are we on that story? How likely is it that this administration could look at walking away from that deal?
I think that they're at great political peril if they walk away from the deal. If you look at geography, there's a big Senate race in Texas that looks pretty competitive. The Republicans have those seats. Democrats always have a wish dream that they'll win a seat. But this year, if you combine Arizona's governor's race, which is quite important to the Republicans going into 28, and Texas, and you think about those two states and their trade relationship with Mexico, I just think that becomes very, very tenuous for the administration to walk away. And Canada, our relationship with Canada is worse than it's been in a very long time, and there's a lot of trade across our borders. Maine has a very contested Senate race, and you're looking at even things like Iowa, contested Senate race, and that's agriculture. If Trump loses the United States Senate and the House, he's facing a very different political landscape in 2027, and it's one he does not want. So I don't think they can afford to walk away from that deal simply because of these political implications for the 26th midterm.
It's never too late. Savannah Guthrie, new prayer for her mother, release. Starmer pledge crackdown on addictive element of social media. Iran ready to discuss nuclear deal compromises, minister tells in Tehran. India beat Pakistan by 61 runs at men's T20 Cricket World Cup. News updates and headlines. News updates and headlines. News updates.
Easy, I think for me, is how do I stay loose? How do I, stay warm?
PGA Tour in tennis.
Think about the shot. I knew what shot I had.
See Marikawa.
I mean, the wind was going to be howling, so I didn't really have to do anything. But just tried to keep pacing back and forth, look at the ocean. I mean, that's what I do every year when we played in Kapalua, was just look out in the ocean.
News update and headlines. News update and headlines. Olympic Games. Italy has 8 golden medals. United States 5 golden medals. Sweden has 5 golden medals. And France has 5 golden medals in Winter Olympic Games in Milan, Italy. News updates and headlines. News updates and headlines. News updates and headlines. Colin Gray, 29 felony charges, 2 counts of second-degree murder, 2 counts of involuntary manslaughter, multiple counts. News updates and headlines. ICE agent on leave accused of making untruthful statement. News update and headlines.